Welcome back, everybody. As promised, I have my good buddy Bryan Jenkins here. Brian. Well, first of all, Brian, thanks so much for being here today, brother.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. I've
Br-
always looked forward to conversations with you.
So, Brian and I served on the board of directors together for 1 year. We had an overlapping when we were RVPs, and we've forged a friendship since then. So, Brian and I have been, I'd say, pretty decent buddies since about 2017, 2018 timeframe around there. So, Brian, thanks again for making time on your for the NARPM podcast because you are, my friend, one of the best kept secrets in NARPM. You're like one of these, you're like a stealth bomber. You're like under the radar, but you have so much knowledge. So I feel very fortunate to be able to get you on here and pull some of that out of you. So tell us a little bit. For those who do not know you, tell a little bit about your PM journey, where you've been, and where you are now.
Yeah, I'm a 24-year veteran of property management.
Battle tested.
Yeah, started back in 2000 as an investor. And then my partner and I, we bought a bunch of homes to do corporate leasebacks to corporate relocatees in the Birmingham market. And we were self-managing our own portfolio. So I was running all the operations for that with a small team. And then actually a real estate company, largest in Alabama at the time, that's now a Berkshire Hathaway company, approached us about potentially purchasing their rental division. That sounds grandiose, but it was 109 absentee owners. Even though they were the biggest real estate company, I think they were facing some of the challenges that real estate companies face when they try to do a property management division in-house. I think there was some distrust or disconnect with the communications aspects of onboarding clients to their internal service. So we made the decision over a weekend and absorbed their properties with ours. We had 52 at the time, so we hit the ground running basically with 161 single family homes, all scattered site. And then we rolled out publicly January 1 of '04 as AHI Properties and kind of grew that portfolio over about ultimately from get-go 21 years working that up and then opening four additional branches. So we had four markets in Alabama, all the major metros, and then we had Oklahoma City and Tulsa. And people ask me all the time, was like, well, how'd you get out to Oklahoma? What'd that look like? And for us, because we already had brick and mortar footprints and offices with my partner's corporate housing company that my wife Sherry runs, and she still runs it to this day. I think she's in her 35th year. We found it easy to open up branches because we already had the brick and mortar and just adding local talent and technology and processes to that. So, and then anytime we had an investor that was purchasing property, and not ones and twosies, but ultimately institutional clients that were purchasing blocks of properties, we would open a new office with them and then grow the retail office around that institutional client. So that worked well. We went from that 161 at our height, we were just over 1,500 doors under management. And then in 2021, I joined Pure and sold AHI Properties to Pure and started working with Pure, growing an institutional management vertical. And actually worked with DD, DD well. So we grew
Current
that.
treasurer of NARPM
Yeah, yeah.
National.
So we grew that out of non-existence into existence today. So worked for Pure for almost 3 years, and then along the way, we started our consulting business, PM Business Implementers. And from that, the reason we got started with that ultimately is knowing that operators have a hard time of implementation. If you go on the conference, you come back with three or four great ideas you want to implement into your business. It's often a bandwidth thing. You don't have the time to do it. You may be operating with a small team and not have the team to actually focus on the implementation and getting that taken care of in a prompt manner. So we have currently working with some clients. We've been working with clients for several months to where we've been helping them implement new systems, new software, components, new processes, and helping them do any of that and a lot of additional stuff. We've helped with website development and content writing, all the way down to business licensing, helping them get properly licensed for real estate commission for startups and split offs, and just getting the bare bones of basic business in place. So it's been a lot of fun.
So I know, excuse me, I know like when we come back from a conference, you're all jazzed up. You got 1,000 ideas, and then you have this plan that you're going to implement all this stuff, and you get home, and then as Mike Tyson says, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth, and then you could kind of get punched in the mouth because you're away for 4 or 5 days from the office, and there's a long list of calls to call back and tasks to do, and then your team is kind of already overworked, overwhelmed, and every time you come back with another idea, they just kind of go, "Oh my goodness, all right, another one," and then they don't have the time to implement. Even though if you implement something, it will save them a bunch of time, or they don't have the personality profile to implement. So you guys built this thing to really help people go from reactionary to proactive. So let's say I just get back from NARPM National and I have all these different ideas. Talk to me a little bit about without hiring PM business implementers. Talk to me about what you would tell these clients or these people, these company owners, what the steps would be to actually get something implemented. Because I meet so many people at NARPM Broker Owner. They have all these things to implement. I meet them at NARPM National in October, 6 months later, and they haven't implemented anything. Tell me, give me the formula.
Yeah, well, largely, and I'll base this on my own experience, because I actually, from my start in real estate to when I actually came across NARPM, there was a decade in which I self-managed and learned from my own mistakes and viewed crosstown competitors as competition, and didn't work with them, didn't try to refer business back and forth, and really didn't develop those friendships like I should have been doing. Obviously, NARPM changed all that. My partner and I, we took our CFO with us to Dallas back in 2011, looking for software solution because we'd been using a server-based product. We went down and we wanted to talk to 4 software companies at the same time, and we did that. And we ended up signing with Appfolio. But out of that conference, I remember vividly being on the airplane headed back to Birmingham from Dallas, and us having a conversation and asking each other, it's like, what the hell was that? Everybody's giving away their secret sauce and their family recipes of success. And, the more I attended additional events and got plugged into the Atlanta chapter ultimately, and then kudos, I don't know if you know Cindy Rampley, but Cindy was president of the Atlanta chapter at the time, and she's now one of the real estate commissioners in the state of Georgia. But Cindy actually challenged me to be on one of her committees and be a committee chair my first year in the chapter. And I chose that chapter because Mike Nelson was there and Robert Locke. And just from a little bit of conversation with several members of NARPM at Dallas and after, I knew that those guys were successful, and I wanted to learn from the best in the business. And so that's why there's still no chapter to this day in Alabama.
How far is it to Atlanta?
It was a 3-hour commitment for me each direction to go. And I,
So
after 20,
for those of you who are like, I can't get to my local chapter because they're north of town and I don't want to drive through downtown. This man drove 6 hours basically to just go to an hour meeting.
yeah,
That
once a month,
once a
I'd
month.
make all the board meetings, all the chapter
So
meetings.
all right. So I think the moral of the story here is getting involved helps. But what I want to do is I really want to pin down like
Yeah, and back to your question and pinning that down. What I would do, and what I got out of that, and I was leading up to the education component of it. Once you understand more about how you should structure your business. Have an honest conversation. Set your managers down. If you've got managers under you, really have an open dialect to where you guys can communicate and evaluate the business. And once I started learning to do that and figuring out what our pain points were, and that's what I would recommend to people. It's like, identify your pain points. What's causing you the biggest issues? What's keeping you from going on vacation? What's keeping you totally engaged while you're at conference, not able to step away and focus on conference, right? Because of stuff going on back home. And prioritizing, if you want to implement things, there is a time and a place to do that. And it's not always a good idea that you're at a conference. May not be your best solution to come back and implement that immediately. You may want to focus on some of your processes, getting your KPIs in order. And
Brian, you bring up a good point. When you say like, what are your pain points? Most people that I know of, when they go to a conference, they really don't have a game plan. I like what you said. When you went to Dallas, you knew your challenge was I need a software. And you went and you evaluated four softwares. And then the cool thing is you made a decision. Like you literally walked away and made a decision, right? And you implemented that decision. My guess is probably the next week. What I would say, well, let me ask you, um, do you do the what's it called when you have like um you go into the conference with like here's my list, this is like smart goals, that's what I'm thinking of. Do you do the whole smart goal thing, and do you think it's smart to actually have goals prior to the conference versus like when you get excited at the conference and you hear these buzzwords and then you want to implement something that you really didn't even have a plan for before you went to the conference? Does that make sense? Like,
it does. That's exactly where I found myself is the conferences thereafter, whether it was broker owner or national, and then some of the regional conferences were still in play back then. Is I would go with those SMART goals, and I would go with the idea of there were people, as I learned who people were right within the industry. I would seek those people out, because if I was talking to, let's just say, I'm just going to throw Tenant Turner out as an example. If I was considering implementing Tenant Turner and I'd had a discovery call with Tenant Turner and I liked the concept of it, I would still rely on, like, hey, who are some of your users of your product, right? And then I would seek those folks out. And today I can pick up the phone and call them, or they know who I am. But back then I had to seek them out at conference and figure out, okay, can I borrow 5-10 minutes of your time, because I really want to ask your opinion, and I want to get your valued input on how this is working for you. What are some of the pros and cons? And that's the value of NARPM, one of the many values, but just the ability for people to share and share openly. And I always tell a vendor, the best thing you can do is if you want to be successful in NARPM, you get some people that are subscribing to your service and get those testimonials and allow them to be your mouthpiece, because that's what we're seeking. Just like I sought out Robert Locke and Mike Nelson in the early days, I still talk to those guys on a regular basis. I talk to Robert at least once or twice a month, um, because I value their opinion, but I want to hear the highs and the lows and then make an educated decision from there. Do we
yeah.
want to
So
implement this or not?
So I think the big takeaway, if you listen to this, is we got NARPM National coming up, and you have Broker Owner, and you have all these other conferences we go to. I think the first thing is, go there with those SMART goals, right? Specific, measurable, what are they, achievable, results based, and time based. I think, right? So write the goal with those with the SMART acronym. This way, when you go to the conference, you don't get caught up in like kind of like the buzzwords, or you don't get caught up in what somebody else is excited about, right? Like I know like automation's big right now. If you're not looking for an automation tool, and then you go to a conference and everybody's talking about Lead Simple or Apply or something else, there's no reason for you to sign up and start saying that's what I want to do next, when that wasn't even on your radar before, like 2 days before.
Don't sign up for something just for the sake of signing up for it. So you can say, yes, I use Lead Simple. Well, do you really use Lead Simple, as an example? So
Right.
Because
So
what we find is if you talk to there are a lot of good operators out there that are, their implementation, they could have 4 or 5 things they're trying to implement, and they're not fully implemented. They're running at 60 or 70% implemented. They're not taking full advantage. And the best example of that is property management software. How many operators that have dynamic software that they're using 60%?
but yet they're going to go buy some other pieces of software because they needed to do X, Y, and Z. Meanwhile, their software could do it if they just dove in a little bit.
It's included in the money that they're already spending on the software, and they're not having to,
Okay.
spend
So
extra
so
dollars.
now I'm a property manager. Let's
Mhm.
say I had my SMART goals. I find the vendors that I'm looking for. I find the people, which I think that's a great key point there. Find the people that have done what it is you're doing, right? If you're at 300 doors and you want to get to 500 doors, and one of your SMART goals is to find 2 or 3 ways to grow your business, well, find those people, figure out how they grew their business, and then that becomes, basically a potential project. But now I go home and I got those 300 units, and my people are working late. They're working, weekends. I'm working weekends. Um, how do you like, how do you even go about this? Like, how do you even, eat this elephant, so to speak? Because it does get a little overwhelming when you get back.
It does. And again, and it's not a one and done to identify your pain points. You have to do that with regularity, at least quarterly. A lot of, toward the end of AHI properties, we were doing that on a monthly basis. I would, with branch managers,
And
giving
you'd be
me
able to solve monthly, you'd be able to solve problems in a month when you got good.
identifying them and then measuring progress toward successfully solving those
Got it.
issues. And
Got it.
many times it took multiple months in order to do that.
Yeah.
Um, and then the other piece that I was able to do, particularly, going from, I'm going to call it from 600 doors to 1,000 doors, and um, hiring the right staff to be able to scale, because the goal was to be above 1,000. My first goal above 1,000 was 1,200 doors. And in order to get there, I hired early to be able to do that instead of stressing the team on the backside. And, there's different philosophies with that, right? Hire
Yeah,
fast,
my brain first goes to, okay, yeah, you can do that, but now I don't. If I'm just making a small profit now, I just basically lose that profit,
right? That's right.
right?
That's right.
So that I'm guessing that's the biggest challenge. But obviously, the better is you get to grow into that person, and you don't your team's not stressed, so you don't lose good team. That'd be the negative of it, correct?
Right. That's right. That's right. So, in generally speaking, the scaling aspect and hiring that person early was usually in a business development role, and being able to build out that network for that person, which takes a little bit of time, right? And ultimately, one of the first things that we did in regard to that was to build out individual lead funnels coming in and working with investment networks, and going out there and beating the bush, so to speak, and meeting and greeting with people, and then making the right contacts, and ultimately establishing those lead funnels in conjunction with your normal organic lead generation, both inbound and outbound. And then, ultimately allowing that revenue to pick up. And then, through NARPM, learning the importance of the KPI for revenue per door, understanding what your average rent is, what your revenue per door is, identifying your ideal client. So there's some things you've got to do in the mix in order to allow you to scale up, to have the additional resources. And then once we had that, we started thinking about that shift from reactive to proactive. So once we got the ops under control, and I had a client that was a friend a long time ago tell me, I saw the guy out in public, and he told me that, he goes, the only time I hear from your team is when they need something. There's a problem, they need money.
Mm-hmm.
And that really stuck with me. And it was off of that one conversation that I pivoted into that role of proactive versus reactive, knowing that the number one complaint in property management is lack of communication.
Communication. Yeah.
So we started focusing on those 3 or 4 items twice a year that we would focus on and implementing. And if I came back with 4 items, ultimately at the end of the year, I would have implemented, you know, 4 times 2 is 8. I would have implemented 6 out of the 8 items, and that was our plan
And
each year.
each item is saving your team time. It's working towards proactive. It's things of that nature. Yeah.
That's exactly right. And then we got to where in the communications piece, we started developing things like webinars quarterly for our clients. And we would open it up, reservations only. A lot of people have issues with, well, I don't want to have all my clients on there if somebody's going to speak out and say something negative about our company. You can control that. I mean, if COVID's
Yeah.
caught
Yeah. You
positive,
can get it where they can't say anything. They can just ask questions. They can't
exactly.
really.
So
Yeah.
we would do invite only and RSVP. They had RSVP. We know who's coming in advance. And then we would do a thing at the end where we used this thing called Wheel of the Names, and you had to be in attendance to actually win the prize at the end. But we would spin it, land on somebody, and give them free management for a month, or whatever you want to throw out there. And then we would record those, and then we would push them out to all of our clients. And what we focused on in those is we would focus on the changes that we were making and the why. Back from my military days, my last stint in the military, because I did 2 branches, Navy and Army, and in between, like the Navy, when I was in the Navy, it was just go do this, don't ask questions. By the time I was only out for less than a year, and I got back in and went into the Army, but my Army commanders were always explaining, giving the why, right? Why we're doing this mission, why we're training for this. And so I took that mentality and applied it to clients. And we would take an hour-long webinar and talk to 3 of those points, 7, 8 minutes, and identify what the benefit was to them, what the benefit was to the resident, what the benefit was to our team, and how it made us a better property management company. And then
I think explaining the why is really important, not just for clients, but for your team as well, right? Because they have to get the buy-in, especially if you're coming back and saying, "Hey, I want to implement this new process, or policy or whatever, right? This new software." The team,
when you start saving them time, you start saving them those phone calls that are coming in that are negative, and creating a positive environment along with what you're doing with team building and that sort of thing. That changes the mentality and the buy-in of the team, and that's important. And toward the end of that cycle, I got to where learned this at another NARPM conference from an operator. It's like, if you don't have the bandwidth, identify somebody within your organization. For instance, if you're implementing property meld, I mean, what I did was I took one of my um, tech-facing maintenance guys that really loved that kind of thing, and put him in charge of implementation, and he ran with it. And he's a bourbon guy, and I bought him his favorite bourbon as a reward at the end of all of it. So,
nice.
just taking that and then doing that as you implement things, and making your team part of that, and that creates much more buy-in.
That was the last hat that I took off at Empire. I call myself the implementation specialist, but the implementer. And I finally gave it to a young kid who is now my business partner here in VPM. But Ross was my sales manager, believe it or not. And I knew he had the capacity, and he had like the personality type, and he became the implementer. We implemented HubSpot. Uh, we were
Uh,
doing automation with HubSpot before Lead Simple was available, was an option, or Apply was an option. And boy, oh boy, man, you get new software, introducing new software. Your team does not embrace it for the most part. And so but he did it. He implemented HubSpot and automation and tasking and ticketing into our operation. And the operation took another huge leap forward, leveling up and being able for us to manage properties more effectively and become proactive. So
yeah.
let's talk a little bit about PM business implementers.
Uh,
Now, this is you're doing this with Dee Dee Lee, who we mentioned earlier, who's the treasurer right now of NARPM, and you guys decided to create this partnership. Why? What was the main reason? What was the main driver behind it?
Well, again, it's both of us have a heart for giving back to the industry, and I think my mantra is always rising tide raises all ships, right? So I'd like to see everybody wanting more professional, leveled up, as you said earlier, playing field. because I believe if you're doing something right, your competitors are going to rise to that level and do it with you and raise the entire standard within the industry. Where we are in the industry today, it's much different. Obviously, after '08, things changed. Money started coming into the space. Um, there's a lot more focus on the space from an investment standpoint. So you have your accidental landlords, but you also have your intentional investors and you have your institutional guys. And we always leveled up to the institutional level because their demands were much higher and they required a certain nuance and understanding for asset level management. And once you start to incorporate some of that into your operation, it benefits your
All
intentional
clients.
investors and all your clients,
Mhm.
and really start having everything forward facing toward that education level. And then once, as you said, once you take that step forward with your company by implementing your systems and becoming more efficient, it's not necessarily so that people don't have to interact with clients and customers. It's the exact opposite. It's to give you more time to be able to turn around and put that back into your business, communicate more. And like for us, what we did we had a 3-year podcast that our business development and I did, manager and I did together. And
Well, Jonathan Cook, right?
good, that's right.
Yeah.
And Jonathan's great. He's got the personality for it. He's just wonderful. But we did the podcast, and ultimately, what we saw happen in our business was we were taking the calls, shopping us on price. We didn't have to justify our service for what we were charging. What we found is people were viewing our company as the property management experts, right? Experts in our field instead of the hired help. And once you make that transition and people come to you for your expertise, like they would for a CPA or an attorney, um, a specialty, that's
Yeah,
a
you actually do yourself a disservice if you discount or you or you have a lower price because they're expecting to pay higher because of the expertise.
that's right. That's right. They expect to pay higher, and if you discount it, you're inviting the wrong client that's always going to question and try to beat you up on price on every level. And unfortunately, I learned that lesson early on, but I also learned coming into finding NARPM in 11, everything that we've gone through. I knew after '08, which was really 10 in our market, I had to diversify the portfolio and I had to focus on intentional investors and institutional clients. And nothing big. I mean, I didn't want to lose a client and have to shut an office down because I'd lost a client. That's not fun.
Yeah. No.
So I purposely, my partner and I made the decision. We wanted to focus on small institutional clients, small funds, and we bring in 200 or 300 doors with a new client, which was great. But if you lost 200 or 300 doors, it didn't cripple your business or cause you to have to lay off staff and that sort of thing. So we just reposition and we'd have the next one teed up and ready to go. So that is ultimately when you get to that. And we weren't perfect. We were just always working to be better and to be more informative, and to actually have our clients actually seek us out for our expertise. But at the same time, using the podcast, using the webinars that we recorded as educational library pieces, right? So if you're talking to somebody on the phone, they've got a question. Oh, yeah, tenant attorney. Yeah, we've got an episode where we talked to James for 40 minutes on a podcast. We'd love to send that to you, and that'll give you a very in-depth analysis based on the questions that we ask him. And just taking our processes and just being open with it.
So we're up against the clock here, but I want to talk like super high level. Give me like a checklist, right, of what you would look at or what you would tell people if they want to go from reactionary to proactive. Because you've given a lot of like, here's some how-tos, some tools to use, but like super high level. Like for example, like the first thing that you would look at, I would think is like your policies, right? Do you have them or not have them? Are they documented? Are they the right policy? Like, is it like how you feel that day? Right? So kind of take me through that checklist that you mentally say, okay, I'm gonna look at the policy for like look at the policy first. Then the next thing would be what would you look at next?
Yeah, kind of reverse engineering a little bit, but processes is first. Look at
Yeah.
processes. Do you have them documented? Uh,
Yeah. Do
if
you
you
actually know what actually is going on, right, in your business,
exactly
right?
does your team know what's going on, or do they have to come to you for every little thing, right? So,
Oof.
and there were days that occurred, and you never get any peace, and you've been there. I've been there. Um, and then the education component of your team and your team allocation, right? Do you have the right person in the right seat? And be quick with those decisions. Don't let them drag out. I talked to somebody the other day that had the wrong PM in the
Hmm.
wrong seat for 3 years before they made a decision to get rid of them, and that can be detrimental and can really harness your business to where it's not growing. So just make sure your staffing levels are correct. Um, you don't want to be you don't want to hire too early. There's always that balance. I mentioned it earlier. It's an individual business decision when it comes down to it, and where you project your growth over, the next 12 or 24 months. Um, but ultimately, you want to make sure you're structured. And I started off departmental before
And
I
you,
even realized what departmental was, and transitioned to
and
portfolio.
Brian, when you say look at the processes, I think you said this earlier, but I want to reiterate. You're not telling everybody look at every process. You're trying to look at the one or two processes that is causing the most challenges in the organization.
Yes.
That's the ones you start with first, right?
That's the ones you start with first. Ultimately, you're going to look at all your processes within the property
Over
management,
time, though.
right?
Yeah.
But figure out if onboarding new clients is a big pain point for you. Look at that process, work that process out. One way I did it, I hired an intern for the summer, and she came in and actually interviewed all my staff and asked them what they did in their job and documented everything. And that's where we started with a lot of raw information. We refined that down, and we created job descriptions for each of our positions and actually published them. And then we utilized those going forward as we would hire and transition. And it made it a lot easier for me to move from departmental to portfolio based. Um, because as I was opening a new office, because of their limited amount of inventory, I found myself naturally going into the pod structure, and then relying on my main branch to provide back end services. So, my first hire, it's going to be a property manager. The property manager is going to wear a lot of hats, right? But during that time, we're coordinating maintenance from our main branch, and so on. So as you scale up, you can add more bodies and build out your pods. And
And
that
then
was a major.
you better have really good detailed job description to know you need to know what they're supposed to be doing. They need to know. And then you've mentioned KPIs a couple times already. So I know you're passionate about that. You have to have the right KPI so you know and they know if they're doing a good job. Then when you are looking at processes, you're not trying to build automation for step one. Step one, you're trying to document the
Yeah, just
existing process.
document the process. You get the
And then
automation.
you tweak it, right? Then you tweak it to the way you like it's like the process happening, probably the not the way you think it is, most
No,
likely, right?
and honestly, it can happen one way one day and another way the next if it's not
Right.
documented.
So we got to have a process that has consistency. I
Right.
get, yeah. And then and consistency matters because you literally because of fair housing and because you want to give the like McDonald's is the same all around the world because of consistency, right?
And
You need
that's
to
that's
get
exactly what stuck in my mind, because I started picking up clients because of the multiple branches. I started picking up clients that have properties at multiple MSAs, right? I wanted them to have the same experience in Birmingham as they did in Huntsville, as they did in Mobile. And in order to do that, our processes had to be tight.
yeah. And I so then the way I did it, and I'm going to ask you before we hit the commercial break is what I did is before I did automation, I threw bodies at the kind of the problem, right? So I documented the process. It was super manual. So I hired a lot of remote team members, which obviously I believe in because I create a whole business around that. And then I built in automation. And when I built in the automation, I had what you had mentioned earlier is I had hired people for growth. They just were remote and I actually needed them. And then automation allowed me to manage more doors per people. And so once I had the automation, now I had ability to grow. Is that kind of the steps that you and Didi take when you go into a client?
It is. And, part of it is, during a discovery call is being honest and being open. We enter an NDA with our clients before they become clients, and we just encourage people to be very open about everything that they have or don't have, and allow us to evaluate it and prioritize how we feel like it needs to be laid out in order to move you from reactive to proactive. And our very first client, which we're still working with 8 months later, um, they hadn't taken vacation. They're a 2-year-old business, almost 2.5, but they hadn't taken vacation the entire time, and they were basically just adding a crazy number of doors each year, just through lead generation sources they developed. They'd done that part right, but what they didn't do right was they had no way of handling all that business.
It was
And
chaos.
yeah, it was total chaos.
Mhm.
And so they had no processes in place, and it was firefighting all day long, right? And everybody's exhausted and worn out, and there's a lot of staff turnover as a result of that.
Yeah. So look, if this is you and you're listening to this and you haven't been able to take a vacation, or your work comes with you on vacation, so it's really not a vacation, or your team is stressed, or your team is working weekends, you don't have enough people, there's too many tasks. That's what Brian and Didi and the PM business implementers, they solve that, right? So think about 8 months later, you're on vacation, your team is not stressed, you're not going to lose your A players, your clients are happier, you're running a proactive business, and your churn rate goes down, and now you're growing, and then it just becomes math. So many doors, I need to input these people and these people.
Yeah, and the client that I mentioned earlier, 8-month client, I mean, some of the things we've done for them is we've implemented 3 major PM lifecycle processes and started the automation on that. We've introduced 4 new systems into their PM company. We've actually helped them build a website. They didn't even have a website before. They were just bringing in so many doors. But the problem was,
Man, I gotta bring those guys on here to so I could on for growth, like how they
well,
do.
we've already plugged you in on one remote team member already. So,
Well, no, I mean I need to get them on the pod.
oh
I need
yeah,
them
yeah,
on
yeah.
the pod, man. If they have operation problems, you know how many of us have growth problems right now versus op problems? So, all right, Brian, listen, we're gonna hit a commercial break. We're gonna hit you back with the lightning round. Everybody, we'll be right back.
Right, thanks, Pete.
All right, Brian, you're gonna hit the lightning round. Are you ready?
I am ready. I think I'm ready.
All right. When you had your own business, we know you were used Appfolio. So I'm going to go right to the next question. What was your org structure?
What was my work structure?
Mhm.
So my partner and I were at the top. We had a CFO underneath of us, and then we had branch managers. So we had five branches. So 5 branch managers, and then under each of those branch managers, we had a pod in place.
Pod structure.
Yeah,
Got it.
pod structure.
Did you use virtual assistants back then?
We did it. Yes, the last 6 years of AHI properties, I used virtual assistants.
What is one piece of advice you'd give someone just starting out in the PM business?
Um, just starting out, attend NARPM events. Um, you go to a conference, you'll find somebody there that's got 0 to 50 doors, and I applaud them every time because they're learning before they get a lot of business and then try to figure it out.
I
That's my
met somebody at a broker owner conference with 0 doors.
I have to.
That's awesome. Does
And I
pineapple
still talk to
belong?
those people, you know.
Yeah, yeah. I think she's in Houston, and I think she's at 200 now, which is good for her.
Yeah,
Does pineapple belong on pizza?
I believe it does.
Okay. Well, I'll arm wrestle you next time I see you about that. All right. Um, I know you don't eat fast food, but when you do, what is your go-to fast food restaurant?
Yeah, my go-to, and it's really not necessarily traditionally thought of as fast food, but Subway.
Subway, eat fresh.
Yeah.
What was your first job?
My first job was working in my family. My dad and mom are entrepreneurs, which is where I got it from. But they had automotive parts stores in West Virginia where I grew up.